that said they were Christians and said they were virgins, but I was a liar. I hid these relationships from my family because my mom, who is here today, forbade me from dating until I turned 22. And I had no idea why she did that. And coupled with the fact that in your teens, you begin to really want romantic connection on a physical and emotional level, I succumbed to the emotional pull to begin dating at 15 years old, and I lied about it. But what I would not give away was my virginity, because if the boy wasn't special enough for me to marry, then why would I give him something that I couldn't get back? And so, parents, if I can encourage you really fast, the letter of the law brings death, but the spirit of the law brings life. The letter of the law, where you just set down a rule, you don't explain it. A rule's a rule, and if I break the rule, what's the point of trying to keep the rule in the first place? But the spirit of the law, the heart behind the law, if you're willing to sit down with your kids, have that discussion, talk about what the consequences are. Like, sweetheart, I love you, there are consequences to breaking this rule, and I'd rather spare you of that. I think that would really give you some credibility, and even if they disobey you, they still know what's coming, that you love them, and that you're open to talking about it. So anyway, so since I decided to date without any consent or counsel from my parents, I embarked on a cycle of doomed romances. The habits I forged in my teen years carried on into my college years and even overlapped into my in my life after I surrendered my life to Christ as Lord. But the grace of God, I sincerely did fear him, and that kept me trying to be as pure and holy as I could be. But without an actual relationship with him, I was beginning to slide into the world more and more. And eventually I did dabble in heavy drinking and in partying. But I still maintained in the back of my head that God demanded purity, albeit I had a perverse understanding of what purity was. I didn't understand that even looking at a guy with lust in my heart made me an adulteress. And so, I am convinced of the power of prayer. Cheryl was sharing this morning about the power of prayer and, the prayer cloth and stuff like that. I can't encourage you enough, because here's what it was. I kind of relate to Cornelius in the Bible, Acts chapter 10. He was a Gentile centurion who, he was a Gentile, not Jewish, but he was still praying to the God of the Hebrews. He was still praying to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He wanted that relationship, gave alms to the poor, trying to do good works. I was kind of like that. Like, I wanted to know the Lord, and I tried to do the right thing, and so, I guess I was trying to impress him or something, but still, he heard me understand, and he was kind of religious, but I prayed the Lord's Prayer every night, just kind of trying to mean it, because I figured, well, he's God, he's smarter than I am, so he can probably tell whether I mean it or not, so I should try to mean this. So I did that, but I think even more importantly was not only that, I tried to pray, but I found out something very interesting from my husband. As I was preparing to share with you today, I was considering my life, and I told Gage that all my life before Christ, I did want to know God, and until college, I was never actually offered sex. I was never actually offered drugs, and most all my best friends were Christians of some sort. And then Gage told me that ever since he was born, Wiley has been praying for his future, for Gage's future bride. And he taught his son, Gage, who's now my husband, to pray for his bride ever since he was little. So that meant that Wiley, my father-in-law, has been praying for me ever since Gage was born, and Gage has been praying for me ever since he was a little boy. That's awesome. So that's prayer for you, and so it's never too early to start praying about something like that. However, for all the Christians I knew and all the churches I went to, no one sat with me and made the gospel personal to me and explained that Jesus' death accomplished for me what I could never earn, and that was salvation. That was atonement. If I had died before 21, I would have suffered eternally in hell, because all my good deeds would never outweigh the crimes that I had committed against a totally good, pure, and holy God. And so it's not that Christ necessarily died for my sins, it's really more that Christ died in my place and took the punishment I had earned. And so, did everything go perfectly once I did surrender my life to Christ? No, it did not. February 2012, I'm going to try to sum this up. I was saved and walking with the Lord, really loved him, but I hadn't quite given over my love life. I I'd given over everything else, not quite the good love life. And so I was dating this guy named Mr. Grumpy Judgy Face. And so, yeah, I knew he didn't love the Lord and went for it anyway. So after a failed attempt to take him to church, I realized that I just needed to break up with him, although I almost didn't, because it was the Sunday before Valentine's Day, and it was another excuse. Oh, I don't want to hurt his feelings, blah, blah, blah. But, he snapped at my friend who was trying to ask him how to like service, and I'm like, okay, like, this just needs to happen. Like, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, so I'm gonna go break up with you to get my life back. And so, the next day, it was overcast, and rain is my favorite kind of weather. So what stood out from the day afterwards is my soul felt clean, and you ladies who live in Bakersfield or have ever lived in Bakersfield, you know how it rains and you realize, like, hey, we have mountains. It was like that, but in my soul, the pollution was taken out of the air, and I could see, the beauty of the reality of what it was to live a life given over to Christ. Like, so much more beautiful, and you don't choke on the air you're breathing. And now that I had gotten rid of the last shackle chaining me into my old life, Jesus was welcoming me into my new life. So I promised him 2 years of singlehood. Let me explain this real quick. In high school, I was dating all sorts of different guys. Nice guys, mean guys, smart guys, dumb guys, blah, blah, blah. And
I didn't know that.
I wasn't happy with any of them. And so I'm like, I need to take 2 years off, not date, just be single for a while, figure out who I am and what I want, but I never had the emotional fortitude to do it. Guy would come along, I have male attention, and I'm falling into another relationship because weak. I was very, very weak. And so now that I gave my life over to Christ, I'm like, Lord, I have the Holy Spirit living in me. I don't have the strength on my own to do this, but you can make this happen. And so I promised God 2 years, but not to find myself and find out what I wanted. It was more to find out about Christ and what he wanted for my life. And so I gave that 2 years to Jesus without the distraction of dating, and it rained that day. And, I had wondered for a second if he made it overcast with me, but I decided that was silly. Why would he send weather for a dumb girl who broke up with a meaning boyfriend? But I had this impression in the back of my head, kind of like hinting that God knows how my mind works, and why wouldn't he do that kind of thing? And so from then on, it was kind of like an inside joke between me and the Lord. Rain was a good thing. And so it's a theme all throughout this story, but I don't have time to explain it fully, so I'm just going to leave it there. Ecclesiastes 5:5 says, it's better to not make a vow than to make one and not fulfill it. And this 2 year long time to be single is a very long time for me. And so that brings me to something I wish somebody had told me. Number 2, the currency that we use to pay for pleasure is pain. The first time I heard this was from Ravi Zacharias, and it's something that I think we all know, but never have words, to put to it. The currency for pleasure that you use to pay for pleasure is pain. You can pay now in the form of devotion, dedication, and discipline, and have your pleasure guilt-free later, or you can take your pleasure now and you pay later in the form of destruction, heartbreak, and damage, and you pay with interest. It's just like the difference between buying something outright or buying it with a loan. You pay more dearly if you're not willing to pay up front. So explore the analogy. I'll let you digest that with your lunch. It goes way deeper, but I'll leave it for now. Another example, I like thinking in analogies, so I'm sorry, there's going to be a lot of pictures and everything. Another example, trying to make something I'm also an odd duck. Trying to make something happen outside of God's will or God's timing is like to do something as intricate and beautiful and complex. This is why I loved having the pregnancy set. Like, honestly, I could probably take out half of what I'm telling you because of what they covered. But trying to take something outside of God's will or something, or his timing is like trying to do something as intricate and complex as building a human with your own hands, and you come out with a Frankenstein's monster. God makes a human as one unified, fearfully, and wonderfully wrought masterpiece, but us, we pull a Doc Frankenstein, and we try to take pieces from here and there, we stitch them together, hoping to build something that only God himself can really build. And you come up with this sad mockery of something that should have been whole, unified, and filled with the breath of God, but instead you have this shambling mess or biblically speaking, if you will, you're bringing Hagar into your life and you end up with an Ishmael. Something forged and forced by your own hand will never be as beautiful, supernatural, or wholesome as something of God's own crafting. At best, what we make of our own lives is awkward, unnatural, and dysfunctional. And so what I'm saying is I made the 2-year singleness promise, and then something went wrong. Instead of choosing the pain of keeping a safe distance, I took the pleasure of friendship with a guy too far to stay platonic with him. And so thing I wish somebody had told me, number 3, boy. Younglings, listen, boy plus girl plus time plus talking and hanging out equals romance. I'm sorry. As I began really growing in my faith, a guy who's an awesome brother in the Lord started to talk to me a lot, and I'm going to call his name Speedy because he tried to rush along the process. As a girl who primarily kept male friends, this was pretty normal, but the Lord helped me notice that I was falling back into an old habit, and that is talking too exclusively with one guy ultimately leads to emotional bonds that pull you into wanting to date him, but I had an oath to fulfill. And so something I wish somebody had told me, number 4. No one comes back from the conversation of no return. As more exclusive conversation took place, we fell for each other and we had the conversation of no return. It's the we like each other, should we start dating conversation. It's a conversation of no return because once you admit to a friend that you have feels for him or he has feels for you, you change the essential nature of your friendship with that person, and you can no longer stay platonic, you can no longer stay neutral towards him. Once you have that conversation, you either have to get deeper or you get out. That's your 2 choices, sorry. And so, I had to tell him that I was only 1 year through a 2-year commitment to stay single, and at first he said he'd wait, but it eventually devolved into him telling me that God didn't expect me to fulfill that promise. Red flag number 1. Having this conversation doesn't alleviate your feelings at all. It's just like scratching a mosquito bite. It feels great for a second, and then once you stop, it's more nasty and intense than it was before. So, those emotional longings. Okay, so singles, if you're caught in something like this and you know it's not right, or this guy is not a decided lover of God, or he's not even a believer at all, make the hard choice now, because it only gets harder as your feelings intensify later. And what ultimately happens is you either sacrifice your relationship with this guy in order to worship God, or you sacrifice your relationship with God in order to worship this man. So, I tell you, this was hard. This tested me more than many things had in my past, because I had to keep saying no to this guy, and even more so, I had to keep saying no to myself. I remember one night I felt terribly alone. I wanted to begin dating this guy, but I knew that I couldn't, so I prayed something that kind of went like this. Lord, this sucks. When I'm out of this oath in a year, whether or not it's Speedy, whether or not it's him, please just set it up to where I can start dating somebody. Well, not just anyone. Whoever I'm gonna date, I want that to be my husband, yes. And I want to know him for a year before we start dating. Sorry, amen. And so after I prayed it and I forgot about it. I felt pitiful about that and I just wanted to forget it, and I did. But the Lord heard me. After I prayed it, I hadn't done the math. Look, I had a 2-year commitment to be single. I was halfway through. So we have 1 year. I prayed to start dating my husband in 1 year from then, but I also asked that I know him for a year before we start dating, which meant 1 year minus 1 year equals now. so either the Lord was gonna have to bring this guy on the scene now, or he was already on the scene. And incidentally, that time, when William Gage Gunter IV moved down from Washington, and it happens to be one of the rainiest states in the country. So, now, I must explain that I loved what they had to say. I must explain that I asked for a year-long stable friendship before dating because it was a personal conviction of mine. I learned from all my failed relationships in the past, and I know emotions come and go. If you date someone only because you have feelings for them or you're physically attracted to them, what happens if your feelings change or looks fade? Along with Christ, a deep friendship has important things in common, earned trust, and proven faithfulness. I like the idea of starting a marriage on a solid footing. You know, maybe it's not for everyone, but it's definitely for me. So something I wish somebody had told me, number 5, be spirit-led about who you date, who you talk to, and if necessary, how you break up with them. Like, Christians, harm comes to the church since, you know, through the act of flippant dating. It's like, okay, I want to have a birthday party, but I can't invite her because I invited him. Or, okay, like this ministry needs volunteers, but I can't invite him because they're involved. Like, if we let the Holy Spirit just lead us, we can always do it right. It's not that God can't redeem these things, but he allows consequences that don't just affect you. So young ladies, yeah. So this is why I say that. One day Speedy texted me an ultimatum that said, if you don't tell me if we're dating soon or not, I'm calling the whole thing off. Well, if God hadn't said yes, then my answer is no then. That was pretty easy. In hindsight being 2020, I realized we had dodged a mutual bullet. I was way too immature, and he was attempting to rule a relationship via power, and that's not gonna work. And so, by then he had moved to a different church for different reasons, not because of us. And for the most part, my circle of friends and ministries were spared the fallout, but it wasn't without consequences, and to this day, my husband still doesn't want to know Speedy's real name, so things aren't awkward. And it's gonna be that way till the day I die. You know, what if I had obeyed God more fully? Anyway, so when I let Speedy go, it rained. That was kind of cool. So I attempted to bury myself further and further in the Lord, and so something I wish somebody had told me, number 6. Okay, know your season. Define your boundaries based off of your season. Season meaning be honest to yourself and to the Lord about where you are in life. Are you called to be married? Are you called to be single? Are you called to be in a certain ministry, relationship, job, or place? Be honest with yourself. If you don't know, ask God and wait, keyword, for an answer. This is knowing your season. Later on, I'll explain how we can determine what our boundaries should be. Use your boundaries to protect what you're called to be in your season. And so it was 2013. I had 10 or so months to go until I was free to begin dating again. But I didn't form boundaries to protect my singlehood, and so as Gage and I met and got to know each other, I now see a pattern that took place. Months go by, and through serving in ministry, Gage and I become closer and closer friends. Sometimes I was focused on Jesus, and other times I found myself focusing on Gage. Wish I had time to tell you all the details, and all the times it rained when something went down, because you'd see the pattern. It's not that I was doing this, and I was doing that, and I, me. No. Like, God only was doing that, like, God, he wasn't being that way to me because I was anything special. He was simply fulfilling a promise that he made. If anyone seeks him, they will find him. If anyone pleases him, he will bless them. If anyone is willing to put him first, that person will be filled with hope and joy in spite of trials. And anytime I disregarded God and his warnings, I became an emotional mess, and the feelings of longing and loneliness got overbearing. I disobeyed and allowed myself to get too close to Gage, and I became distracted from the one who was really giving me joy. Let's see. I think I'm going to go ahead and skip my examples, but yeah. So I can tell you later if you want to know, but not right now. So anyway, Gage and I, we're going back and forth. As I'm focusing on God, things are cool. And then when I would get distracted by Gage, things are not cool, things are very hard, as I was saying. And so by the time February actually did hit, his dad, Wiley, gave us advice that we should take 10 days to abstain from communicating from one another. So February 1st to February 10th. And we decided to go ahead and do that, and that was kicked off by a rainy day. And we focused on seeking the Lord's will regarding dating. And I asked Cheryl about it, and she said it couldn't hurt. I'm crushing on this guy so hard right now, and you're telling me that this would, anyway. Fine, so we did, we took that 10 days. And during that time, I did get some cool answers to prayer. So after that, Gage and I did talk a couple times, and I was agonizing over what the Lord's will was. And by February 27th, I had resolved that I wanted to take my hands off my circumstances and try not to manipulate my life to get more Gage in it. I tried very hard to just allow the Lord to pace things in his own time, so the 27th was the day that we finally began dating. Allow me to set the scene. my brother, who's in the Navy, he was getting moved, and they didn't give him enough time to move out, so he was gonna lose all his stuff by February 28th. Can't let that happen, so I took a family emergency day off work, and I started calling around friends. Now, I have to be honest, I really wanted to ask Gage to see if he could come with me and that kind of thing, but no, I was gonna, besides, he had class that day, it wasn't gonna work out anyway. So I asked every girl. For some reason, I had no takers. No one wants to make the 4-hour trip and move a bunch of stuff, and then make another 2-hour trip, and then unmove a bunch of stuff, and then take another. Anyway, I had no takers, and I contacted all the guys too. I had no takers, and so I was like, okay. Then I asked Gage. I was like, okay, Lord, I need someone to come with me to help navigate, help move things, be with me while I'm out of town in an apartment with men I don't know. Like, that would be really nice. And so I did contact Gage. Now, I needed to leave town right at 9 a.m. to meet the movers on time. Well, I texted Gage, who I knew he had class, but his noon class was canceled, and his morning class that began at 8 got out an hour early, at 9 a.m. So, if you take that clockwork timing and you apply it to the rest of the day, that's how the rest of the day went. It was boom, 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 boom. God, like, orchestrated everything. And that's not even the craziest part, but anyway, I have to skip over the details, but through that set of very peculiarly timed circumstances, Gage asked me if I would be his girlfriend, and I eventually accepted, and he had us pray kneeling at my brother's futon. And after that, we had moved everything. You know, we got caught in what I like to call a hydroprolific onslaught of death, which was a huge rainstorm. So we ended up being stranded on the Grapevine at 4 a.m. Because between the hydroplaning and falling asleep at the wheel, figured it was just a good idea to pull over and sleep. So, but the cool thing about that is God timed it to where we didn't have time to physically get into trouble with one another, or we were too tired to do that. And I really wish things had stayed that way. So, thing I wish someone had told me, number 7, how to determine your personal boundaries. The first year and a half of my relationship with Gage is where I learned the very hard lesson of the slippery slope, which pretty much is just an illustration of James 1, verses 14 and 15. But each one is tempted when he is dragged away, enticed and baited to commit sin by his own worldly desire. And when the illicit desire is conceived, it gives